Hello, welcome to another episode of the GeoTech Hour. We're honored you could join us. We have an august panel here today to talk about what can the new administration do to accelerate fast tech adoption, innovation, and delivery of services to the public. I'm Dr. David Bray, your host and inaugural director of the Atlantic Council Geotech Center. And what we're really trying to focus on is with the start of 2021, a new administration going into the White House. What does this mean for how we can use tech to both serve the public here at home in the United States and how to work with our allies on digital coalitions of democracies? I'd like to go first to Byron Caswell. Byron, first time at the GeoTech Hour, longtime friend, and we really appreciate everything you're doing as a positive change agent. Would be interested in your thoughts, Byron, as to, at a high level, could you introduce yourself and could you share what areas of tech and data do you think the new administration could do to accelerate adoption, innovation, and delivery of services?
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. So I'm Byron Caswell. I'm Vice President of Strategic Consulting at ICF International. And I was thinking about this. I was chewing this over the last couple of weeks after we talked. And I tend to gravitate to the boring answers here, and that's probably no surprise to you guys who worked with me at the FCC, given that you all did the fun things and I had to do the boring budget and acquisition stuff. But everything from, the fundamentals of how to enable decision makers to fail fast, pivot, and make better investments is really core to the ability to transform and change and modernize and do things, right? Where everything from policy adoption to relooking at why we do things the way that we do to meet specific missions. And so, all that stuff is the fundamental mechanisms of government to do technology in service of mission, right? Let's step a little bit out that beyond the mechanisms for it. The grand challenge framework that previous administrations had used in specific areas of interest to the public, another great one to foster public-private partnership and really drive targeted investment and targeted action in specific areas that are of interest to the national discourse, right? Let's go further than that, right? What could be weird to foster tech adoption? What are some of the challenges that we've hit in citizen services, at the agencies that we've been at the businesses that we've done? Expanding the USPS mission to be the email of the public, right? What's one of the big challenges we've always hit is identity. Identity is core to security. Identity is core to citizen service delivery. Like, think about becoming more of the Gmail for the public sector, for the American public, right? That's a thing that could effectively help solve some of the big structural challenges that we've had with citizen services across the government there. So, those are sort of just throwing spitball ideas out there, but all of which, involve more ability to really go and look at how we do and why we do what we do for, the mission and the business of government, and then figure out, what are the things that we could do a little bit differently to really change the paradigm for how we solve problems too.
Really great insights, Byron, and it shows, you are always too humble when you give yourself your introduction. You truly do make a lot of movements behind the scenes and get a lot done. If I could ask you a real quick rejoinder, because I really liked what you were saying about, how can we make the work of the hard stuff that oftentimes is not the exciting stuff get done. There's been talks about, in the last few years, this maintainers movement. And so I guess I'd be interested in your thought, why is it that oftentimes, we only see the shiny and we don't see the stuff that really is the heavy lifting that really does need to be done? And do you have thoughts about how we can make that so that the public at least understands this is the hard work that any organization does, private or public, but how can we make it so that maintaining and moving things forward and doing those muscle movements is something that we need to do as well in the digital space?
Well, it's funny because, that stuff's not the sexy thing. It's not the shiny thing. That's everybody knows that there's back office work that goes in any employment that really contributes to the ability of the organization to do the job that they set themselves out to do. Elevating that effort space into something that is lauded and is sort of, hey, this is noted as a key. It's not just the technologists, it's not the architects, it's not the managers, it's the people who are really trying to figure out at its core how an agency, a mission, an organization, a company, a group of individuals can work together well. That's business modernization at its best. It's just the business of getting work done, which isn't fun, isn't sexy, it isn't out there publicly, but creating, award structures, creating, having these kind of events and celebrating the folks who are figuring out how acquisition and government works better and lauding their successes, or figuring out, where the financial management across the government looks. Again, I married an accountant. Accounting isn't sexy, right? That's just not that's just not the way it looks for it. That's just not the truth of it. But it enables us to do the things that we do really well.
Very well said, Byron. And I think you and your wife, you're the power couple for GSD getting stuff done. We really appreciate that. Would like to now go to Ivana. Ivana, this is you're back on the GeoTech Hour. You've been a longtime friend of the center as well. Could you real quick share who you are and share your thoughts about what the new administration could do to accelerate tech adoption and delivery of services to the public?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me. I am the CEO of Omelas. We do a lot with influence operations online. I'm also a non-resident senior fellow with the Scowcroft Center with the Forward Defense Initiative. And so Byron actually hit on a point that I wanted to make about digital transformation, and sort of, even before you start to do that, you still have to kind of work on the cultural aspect of people getting used to tech adoption, and also not over fetishizing innovation as this like silver bullet to all the problems that we have. But I also want to throw a couple of other ideas out there. So the first, in terms of delivery of services to the American public, is credible news, right? So whether that's a COVID-19 vaccination or 4 years of disinformation that culminated in the storming of the Capitol last week, the new administration really needs to think of innovative ways to do messaging that are engaging and can compete with the addictiveness of social media, right? Because conspiracy theories and all these fake news just happen to have the tendency of getting more eyeballs than very dry facts that the government is very known for, is pretty well known for just like delivering out there. So how can we actually make the content more engaging, and then how can we actually distribute it in a way that will get in front of people's eyeballs? And then the second is really also around the notion of 5G, but not because we need 5G, but because of the economic transformation that it can bring. It's going to add $2 trillion, which is a very conservative estimate to the economy. And also from a national security perspective, the US is falling behind a lot of other countries. In China, they now have installed hundreds of 5G stations in Xinjiang and the Gobi Desert, right? So how can we actually keep up with that? But at the same time, 5G is also more of a diplomatic win that the new administration should think about. And alongside that, I do want to also put forth the notion of internet norms and ethical frameworks, especially given the push on big tech, right? Given what happened last week. But the US really has stepped away from leading those types of conversations. And I think it's time that we get back into those conversations.
Very well said, Ivana. And as one who has experienced misinformation before, I think you're hitting the nail on the head that it's only getting harder and harder. With it seems like every 6 months, we thought it was bad, but now the next 6 months it's like it's even worse. And so I worry where does 2022, 2023 take us? Maybe to tie what you've said and a little something earlier that Byron said about trying to make some way that we can do an identity layer, or at least try to figure out a way that still allows people to protect their privacy. They don't have to share it if they don't want to, but if we don't know who's interacting with the US government, we may end up with a whole lot of bots, and we may have seen that in the past. And so I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts about how can we do identity, given that there's some parts of the country that they don't want to share any information with the US government, other places do. Be interested in your thoughts about what can we do to do that, to have that as an accelerated citizen service.
I think we need to talk about trust, right? Like let's not even talk about identity and digital transformation and 5G and all these buzzwords. Like, let's talk about how can we actually increase the level of trust among different groups within the US, right? Just like among the population, but then also we need to actually start to come up with a set of institutions that we all believe in. And clearly the media is no longer seen as a credible institution by a lot of people, and neither are a lot of the government agencies. And so what's sort of left? And I think we have to either figure that out and use like another group of, institutions, as proxies, or the next administration really needs to figure out like, okay, what do we need to do in order to have the American people trust us again?
Very well said, and like you said, it does boil down to trust. Are you willing to whatever the source is, whether it's the media, it's the government, and if you don't, who do you go to? And I think that really does hit the nail on the head. That's part of the hard work we need to do. And like you said, put aside the tech first. What can we do to restore some sort of bridge building in this country? So really appreciate all that you do, Ivana, and really appreciate those remarks. Would now like to segue to Derry Goberdancing. Derry, longtime friend of the GeoTech Center. You're one of our senior fellows and really the go-to person that I always recommend people to when they have questions about machine learning. But if you could real quick introduce yourself and share us with your thoughts about what the new administration could do to accelerate adoption, innovation, and delivery of services.
Sure. Thanks, David. So Derry Goberdancing. I'm the CEO of Harper Page, and this is one of those interesting challenges where do you start with this problem? It's the chicken and the egg kind of a situation. What do you solve first, and where do you go to solve some of these challenges? And I think we're all kind of hinting at it. This is not a technology problem. It starts with people, right? And we've got to work on the people side of the aspect of this equation first before we can work on the technology side. I can throw every buzzword that we can and say, let's adopt X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't matter, because if the people won't do it, it won't matter. And I think it has to be purpose built. Building the next big machine learning thing and calling it, look, I've built an AI thing for X, that means nothing, right? What is the purpose? What are you doing? And more importantly, what problem were you solving in the first place? Right? And how did you make someone's life better, right? The purpose of all the government services is to help do that. And there are a ton. I'll give you an example. My mother-in-law, who has never supported anything in the government space for her entire life, just started supporting a government contract. And she didn't realize how much work that the government actually does and provides to the average citizen until she started interacting with them on a day-to-day basis. And I think that goes back to the point of, we have so many services that are already out there. The problem is we didn't build them for everybody. We built them for the 5 people that can kind of sort of figure out their way to stumble into the problem. How do we get folks to the table? How do we bring and engage those citizens to actually provide them those services? What is that challenge, and where do you go? Is it a national strategy, or is it a local one? And I've always stated in every conversation we've had, if you only focus on the national strategy with the public-private engagement, you are set up for failure. And we've seen what failure looks like. So let's move past failure and let's look for that public-private engagement across the spectrum. And in doing so, without internet connectivity, 5G, hopefully, but basic, I think some folks would settle for basic DSL at this point. Any high-speed internet in the remote regions would be extremely helpful. And with what COVID has done is expose the challenges that imposes on not just governmental agencies, but the citizens. And so how does the government and the administration provide more policies to enable that to actually happen, and more competitive across the board?
Very well said, Derry, as always. And I like how we're quickly getting into the point that it's really not about the tech. It really is about trust. And then trust, of course, goes to its people, not the channel Soylent Green, but its people. And so I guess I'd be interested in a real quick rejoinder on that, Derry. As we think about building trust, I think you hit on something really key, which is it's only until you actually start working with the government do you realize all the things government does. And it's easy when things are going on to take granted for some of the things that we do to serve the public. So I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts. Do we need new models, like maybe a part-time reservist model or other types of things that could be done? I mean, what would be your thoughts about how we can make it so that it does become more of an all of us versus an us versus them conversation?
I would say a part-time reservist might be a bit too harsh. Some might take that as a punishment versus a blessing. So I will hold statement on pushing that as the standard. But I think this has to do part with civics lessons back in high school. Do we teach folks what is available? Right? Are they taught any of this stuff? We may have gone away from that and added other courses, and that's okay. We've evolved as a society. However, I think we got to go back to basics, and it's back to the education. And speaking of the education, part of the government's piece of this is that technical education, so that people understand what is available, what's out there, and more importantly, and I think it would behoove us to add cybersecurity to that that training and curriculum, so that we can make ourselves better armed with the understanding of what we're doing and what we're looking at when we are better citizens on the internet.
Well said, Derry, as always. And yeah, you probably just explained a lot, at least about my own experiences. Civics was my favorite class in middle school, and maybe that just explains everything else that followed. But maybe civics and cybersecurity would be a really exciting class to offer to not just middle schoolers, but elementary school, high school, and college on up. So thank you for that, Derry. We'd now like to segue to Brittany, first time on the GeoTech Hour, longtime friend. Brittany, if you could real quick share who you are and give us your thoughts about what the new administration should think about when it comes to delivering services to the public better.
Thanks so much, David, and nice to meet you all as well. Brittany Galley, I am the Chief Success Officer of a software company called Mobile Hub, as well as I dabble with Regent Solutions in the IT, PMO, and program management world. And so that's kind of my background, as well as not only software, but also program management. So I think you guys have all made amazing points, and Darius, especially yours, I really think that, going back to David's point as well about the people versus the technology problem, right? I think personally 2021 is the year of getting and removing all technical debt. And this administration is going to have a significant amount of labor to put into that exercise. There's a ton of technical debt. It was there in the previous administration. Did they spend any time on it? Did they spend any money on it? Did they spend enough time? Did they spend enough, energy on it? I don't think so. And it's only getting harder and harder. So that cross-private public collaboration is going to not only have to increase, I think, over this administration, but they're really going to have to focus on the customer-facing piece of this, because if they don't, you think about it, the taxpayer, the citizens, that is your customer. That's your stakeholder, right? And their acceptance to your ease of use is going to be whether you win or fail, I think, in this administration, and the changing that perception. So back to Derry's point, that perception has to change of the federal government and this administration coming in. And that's going to be a big mountain to climb. I really do think that. I think that they can do it, but they're going to have to start small with small wins, localize, nationalize, and then globalize. So thinking outside the box, how do we partner, not even just collaboratively and nationwide, or even localizing with our state or local governments. But we've really got to step outside the US and look at this from a global perspective. It's time, because if we don't, we're just going to be further and further behind, I think. So I think, the overall thing is to, getting rid of that technical debt, cutting that fat, and really changing that perception of the citizen to what the federal agencies do for you, because they do a lot. They do a lot. And it's not an easy task, but like I said, with due diligence, the right teams, the right initiatives, staying to the core focus, I think that's really important.
Very well said, Brittany. And maybe to build on what you said and what Byron said earlier, that there's a lot of heavy lifting of things that aren't necessarily the most exciting things. And I think you're spot on. Lead with the customer facing and the things that people can see and say, this is looking better. Of course, obviously a lot of heavy lifting behind the scenes. Do we need to have like real quick videos of here's what an insider view is, or here's what I thought before I came in? Give us your thoughts about how we can make helping delivery of tech services to the public exciting again. I guess I could see that on a yellow or blue hat or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest statement around it all is, ease of use. So the biggest thing now is how easy, if you even look at, SaaS-based software, whether it's a mobile app or technology software, the gatekeeper right now is ease of use from the consumer's perspective. How easy is it to sign up, right? So if they don't nail that from a technology perspective when they're interacting with this citizen, right? They have to nail that. That has to be it. Otherwise, you can put all the technology on top of it, but if you have a 99-page form for them to fill out online, it's not going to work, right? So I think that you really have to get back to, what is the customer experiencing? That customer being the citizen. And we've really got to start with that, is if you want to interact with them, you have to make it ease of use.
Well said. Really appreciate that, Brittany. And I think that sets it up perfectly for Dusty. Okay, we've already heard from 4 great people, but I know you can take the bar even higher. First, if you could introduce yourself, and again, welcome to the GeoTech Hour. And then could you share us with your thoughts about what the new administration should be thinking about in terms of delivery to the services up to the public?
Absolutely, David. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet everyone. My name's Dusty Lown. I'm CEO of a dustless workforce reporting platform and co-founder of that, also tech entrepreneur and advisor for modernization to many human beings and agencies and businesses. But I'm probably going to echo a lot of what everyone else has said because we're all hitting on the same thing. Technology adoption and innovation and all that fun stuff has never been a technology problem, it's a people problem. So I view it as three things. If I looked at the federal side, and I'll go down to the local side, but we obviously need to educate everyone and educate. I think Ivana said something really interesting with the word fetish. Every time you hear government workers talk about technology or talk about the latest thing, half the time they can't even implement the most basic thing that led up to that 10 years prior. So we're already 10 years behind in the actual execution, but we're not. But we're talking about the future. So first of all, just being practical about what the agencies can take on and what they can implement. I think there needs to be an incentivization program. So like the private sector, we're all incentivized to do great things. In the government, you're not incentivized to save money because you'll lose your budget. So how do we do great things, optimize, but we don't get, we don't still take on the bloat because we'll lose it the next year if we do good things. So things of that nature. And then there needs to be consequence. That's the one thing nobody talks about. Like if you fail in the private sector, your business shuts down. So if you have an agency that's underperforming, not doing the things it's supposed to do, there should be real consequences, not at the employee level, but at the agency level, in my opinion. Until you have those consequences, we'll keep having areas of inefficiencies, and there's no incentive to go forward that. Now, the other thing I see is if we're talking about unification, I hear this administration talking about that, then all agencies need to be unified under a government, umbrella. So we need to break down the barriers of procurement. We need to break down the barriers of adoption and things of that nature. So why can't we do enterprise purchase agreements for many of these service providers? Because let's face it, civilian agencies all kind of behave the same way. We all are internal operations. I think the government has to behave the same way from an HR perspective, probably from a RFP perspective, things of that nature. So there's ways we can unify it there. So, and I really do think on the education side, we can also use the detailing components of the federal government. I think people should be detailed to more agencies so they can see how the other ones are working. I also think one thing we've talked about in the past, David, was if annually government employees could go work for technology companies and technology companies could swap their resources out into government agencies, so kind of do a round robin approach, we'll understand each other better. And so I'm a big proponent of experiential learning, where you need to be embedded into something to learn it and understand it, not just see it from the outside world. And I think that's a problem for all of us. The government sees the technology from the outside world, and we see the government from the outside, never the inside experience. And when I came to the FCC to help out, I had never had any government experience. It was eye-opening on how everything works. And I was able to, educate myself a little bit better so I could serve the public.
Very powerful statements there, Dusty. I actually hope we can not just share this entire video, but maybe we could actually pass along a clip of what you just said to our members of Congress, because I think there was a lot that you unpacked there. In particular, like you said, the need to try and understand both across different government agencies, so having exchange programs also with the private and the public sector. You hit on procurement, and I think that was also something we've heard earlier with some of the comments, particularly Byron's as well, that can oftentimes be a stumbling block before you even get to tech. I was wondering if maybe you could share, briefly for our audience, how can procurement be a hindrance? But even more importantly, you talked a little bit about having enterprise agreements. Just unpack that a little bit for our audience as to how procurement can be a source of acceleration or not.
Well, I think it's the FAR, right, in the federal side, which is a massive book. Hardly anybody's ever read it. So the first answer you get when you say, "Can I do this?" is that they say no, but they haven't read the FAR. Luckily, we had some individuals that knew that really well. And there's some interesting things you can implement to bring the technology in quickly, try it, but it doesn't have to follow all the steps right away, basically like all the steps to get to FedRAMP or to get to your availability, quotient. So we were able to do that a couple of times, bring it in as a development pilot, are one way you can get around it, so you're not going out to the whole far extent of it. I lost on the second side of that question because I was so.
Oh, you're just talking about other ways to accelerate in the farm.
I'm like, you can buy this for 25K. Why can't we? And then you had all these rules. But yeah, so the first side is, everybody needs to not just say no because they don't understand the acquisition rules. They should go ask somebody that knows them and knows ways around them. It's a little bit harder, but it will help us. And then the second side, David, sorry, go ahead.
Well, then the second side was just, okay, so understanding the FAR, that can be the barrier, but that's how we need to overcome it. You were talking about enterprise agreements and how that can move things forward. So how could that help? Yeah.
So how much we're already seeing there's partnerships with some of these consumer-based products, Twitter, et cetera, that is siding on the side of government and misinformation. So we have very powerful people inside of the government space that can go to a vendor and say, look, you're going to make for $4 billion, just give us everything and we'll be able to do something right across the whole government. So we don't have to keep going back to contracts. We don't have to do, recompetes. We don't have to do all the fun stuff. There's trusted vendors out there that are doing these things, and that can be provided across the whole government. And then when an agency needs it, they just draw down off that enterprise license agreement. And that's a $4 billion a year, profit to that company, but it's yearly, and you're good. You don't think about it again. And then every 4 years, just like I do in the private sector, it's probably even quicker, but I'm going to go with government. You need to reevaluate those 5 vendors that you agree to do business with. So say it's ServiceNow, Workday, Box, et cetera. Well, 4 years, what's the next ones that are coming out, and can they do better? And have those type of agreements in place for the agencies.
I really like how you put that together. Is agreed that oftentimes we find individual agencies each doing similar procurements for the same products, and that's just creating a whole lot of work. And I don't think we would ever see the private sector say, I want each of my different divisions to do their own procurement, but that's oftentimes what's happening. And then you think about cybersecurity too. I mean, if we do this so that instead of it's each agency trying to do cybersecurity for those trusted products, but it's done by one and you can use by many without having to continuously monitor it each by each agency, that would also be powerful. So really appreciate everything you said there, Dusty. That now sets it up for us to go to now a conversation about, well, let's dive a little bit deeper and say, okay, so how do we start getting this done? I will say all of you on this have been extremely gracious on the GeoTech Hour. You haven't jumped in with any of the comments with each other, but this is meant to be a chance to be lively. So feel free to jump in, and I know you won't hold back. But with that, Brittany, I'd like to go to you first and ask for your thoughts about, you talked a little bit about why this matters. It's about the customer experience, but could you dive a little bit deeper and share us, your thoughts about, at the end of the day, if you were to try and make a pitch for the next 6 months, the next 12 months, the next 2 years for the new administration to get trust and buy-in from the public on these efforts, what would be your sort of stump speech as to why this improving delivery of services using tech matter?
I think the taxpayer, which again is your customer and that's your stakeholder, right, deserves it. It deserves it compared to the last 25 years of experience that they've had with their federal agencies and their federal government. It's time. It's time. And, full circle, I'll go back to Oprah's speech from way back when, is time's up.
Right.
Okay, they're over it. They're sick of it. We saw it with the Department of Unemployment that happened, with all of the unemployment that happened in those applications, and that big process that failed miserably and is still technically failing because we're sending out billions of dollars to dead people, right? We're seeing this happen with the forbearance programs with the financial institutions and agencies that are on the back ends of this. They can hardly keep up, and they don't have even, I would say, based on those programs and what you're seeing, it's not even legal, some of the stuff they're doing, because they're just trying to keep up, right? It's time. The citizen deserves it. They deserve this experience to be like some of the private experiences, private partnership experiences or private technology experiences that they exist on the outside world. And, the idea is that you don't have a big, long procurement process like Dustin is talking about, right? You need to move swiftly, and we need to move swiftly. And the timing is now.
Well said, Brittany. I think hopefully people are listening to that conversation, and because you encapsulated it very well. So Derry, going to you, if the time is now, how do we help with the challenge that, oftentimes, because, whereas in the private sector, things can be done behind the scenes. If it doesn't work out, public relations can handle it and massage it. In government, when things go well, usually nobody hears about it. And when something goes bad, everyone hears about it, or even if it's just a rumor that something went bad. So how do we translate the fear of failure to something where it's actually like, you've got to do something, even if it's not always going to work right the first time, it's going to be about rapid pivots to get it right. I'd be interested in your thoughts about how do we help people cross over that threshold that people may feel like doing nothing is better than doing something.
So it all starts with leadership, right? And it all starts with, where is the leadership from the top? And it's not just voice leadership where you make a fancy statement and then you walk away from it. Leadership doesn't end there. Leadership means you empower and you work with, and you're there for the longevity, not the 2-second speech that you gave, which sounded really awesome. You inspired folks for about 2 seconds and then that was it. That doesn't work, right? And what we need here is leadership across the board from every sector to agree that this is something that we want to do. And we should all agree that improving the services are better. We have so much technical debt, as was mentioned before. We have so much old and archaic services that we leverage for reasons that were there. And some of them, you know what, for example, there are some agencies, I won't name agencies. This is not an agency naming thing, but there are some agencies that have very archaic systems that are 60 years old in some cases. And you know what, they still work. And the answer was, well, they still work. And if we touch it, we actually don't know what will break. And it can actually cause a catastrophic failure. Okay, fine. For some of those, we can recognize that those situations are there, but just because we recognize it doesn't mean we shouldn't do something about it, right? And leadership means requiring the courage to stand up to the public and say, we're going to break some things. Here's what we're going to break, and here's what we're not going to break. And here's the risks that we're going to accept. And I would also challenge everyone to understand that just because the old way of doing things is there, doesn't mean it should be the way we do things moving forward, right? The way you treat your kids and you raise kids, you don't watch your kid fail continuously and you just look at them and laugh. I mean, I'm sure it might be fun for about 2 seconds for your TikTok or YouTube video or whatever, streaming platform you've got, but you help them, right? And you empower them and you show them different ways and you encourage them to think differently. If you ran straight into a door, you learn differently. Oh, maybe I should probably not run into the door, approach doors slowly and change my approach. Well, let's do that. Let's be bold. Let's start doing those things. And I'm not making these statements as grandiose. These are being done right now. There are agencies, and I will call the good ones out. There are folks in DHS who are trying this. There are folks at IRS who are trying this, and I want to give major kudos to IRS for their level of courage to go out to the marketplace and say, we are not releasing a large procurement. Here's a $25,000 procurement, and this procurement is going to last for 2 or 3 months. 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, whatever the short term is. And it's firm fixed price. Take price off the table. You come and you deliver us something, whatever it is. And I'll tell you something, they didn't care if you were a small business or a large business. They wanted to know what you can bring and what innovations you can bring. Because at that point, you level the playing field. It could be anyone at that point bringing that service to the table. And you're changing it. And as far as the FAR goes, all of it is allowed, right? If anybody actually read the FAR, you can drive a truck through it. Right. and the restrictions are there that get put on are actually put on because of the lack of understanding and training and information and the lack of empowerment. The fear that is granted on one side that says you shall never do X, Y, and Z. And we want that fear because we don't want corruption to take place. However, we also need to balance it. And so what I challenge everyone to do is start thinking differently. How can we as leaders, and leadership is not only all the way at the top, but leadership at the middle, leadership at the lower ends, and ask to challenge that, right? These are questions that were brought up, and you know what, quite frankly, it's working in some of these pockets. And we have to engage with leadership across the administration and say, here are my challenges, here's what I'm trying to do. And don't just say it at the top, but actually meet with the lower level folks and say, if everyone's getting in your way, here's my number and call me and I'm going to clear that out of your place.
Exactly. Well, bravo, Derry. And what I really like there is that we should start recognizing that it's not about failure as you haven't learned something from it. It's only failure if you really just keep on doing the same thing, running to that same door over and over again. It's that we should look at failure as really being an acronym, which is first attempt at iterative learning. Let's do something second, let's do something third, let's do something fourth. So really liked how you unpacked that there. And you actually gave some very strong examples of how people are doing that. I know Dusty would have loved back when he was trying to bring about change as a positive change agent at the FCC, that sort of firm fixed price to bring in some of the smaller software contracts. And maybe Dusty, I'll go to you then. If not to put you on the spot, but I know you had a very fun, and I use fun both in a real sense and in quotation mark, experience trying to help the FCC with its consumer complaint system. This is now 5 or 6 years ago, but could you maybe share for audience, what were some of the cultural and the acquisition challenges that you hit to what was ultimately a successful effort? But I know there were some times there where you probably were just like, these folks aren't getting it. If you could real quick share your story, I would be really interested in what you can share.
Yeah, sure. I think this happened in 2015, so this might have been the first public-facing SaaS product that rolled out in the federal government.
Exactly. Yes.
It impacted 500,000 consumers. But when we walked in, somebody said, "Hey, can you take an old form and modernize it?" And in my world, I'm like, "Yeah, that's ridiculous." Well, what they didn't tell me was this affected every single carrier in the United States of America. It affected every single consumer group. It affected a bunch of legal groups. It was a Senate mandate. And there was a bunch of people that were going to get exposed in the process of bringing about efficiencies. So once we got into the agency and started understanding all these things were impacted, you got a sense of the scale of what you were taking on. But the naivety of not really caring, because I was told to come to a job, so we had to get really creative on the procurement side, where we had to have a contract company to take on the licenses, so the agency didn't have the liability for those licenses, because the company, they didn't have all the programs they had today to get FedRAMP compliant. Of course, that's the first thing people ask: is it FedRAMP? No, it's not. Well, we've never heard of it. So first everybody's trying to get it thrown out. Well, then we were able to kind of quash that. Then everybody had their own. It's impacted a lot of different divisions inside the FCC, so everybody had their own take on. They were being impacted more than somebody else. So through the help of, David was a leader that was very fearless. We had a person that was in charge of process. She's since passed. Diane Cornell was an amazing woman that just wanted the process changed. We had a wild man that supported David, and he knew the FAR and everything frontwards and backwards. And both those guys said, "Hey, Dusty, just go." Byron supported me in different ways behind the scenes. And we just slowly started incrementally putting these changes in place. And I satisfied every legacy question of me. So even though I was working in a modern way, it was still asking me all these legacy ways of doing implementations. But I satisfied all those so people could never question what we were doing and throw a wrench in it. And slowly we just kind of went through everybody, got internal, external stakeholders on board, realized what we were doing, went in front of the Senate staffers, explained what we were doing, and just slowly brought everybody on board. And then we did what we said we were going to do. I think that's the most important thing. I think a lot of contract companies come in, they give you a dog and pony show, and they don't do what they're going to do. And that's where the lack of trust, internal resources don't trust you contractors, because you never do anything good for them. And so we actually did that. And we brought a lot of, citizens now in one day could have a complaint heard, which took, 15 to 20 to 30 days before. I think there's an article about some woman getting a refund right away. And then the workers started really enjoying that they had a new way to work, and it could change their process, and they weren't stuck with some legacy thing. And so over time, you just got everybody kind of on board, but it was a bit painful.
Oh yeah, I can remember the flag that was, and I think you're far too modest about one. It was wild success once it got out, but you're absolutely right. There was that period right before we went live, I remember, where there were the workers behind the scenes that were concerned that if this was successful, then they wouldn't be needed anymore, because the old system required a lot more of them than the new system. And so in some respects, it was the inside that was your fiercest opponent, even though they weren't verbalizing it. But then it was about 3 to 6 months later, they came back and they actually said, "This is great. It's now freed us up." And of course, there's plenty of other work to be done. So that fear that people had that they were somehow going to be out of a job was not the case. But kudos to you, Dusty, on that. Derry, I see you have a quick rejoinder, so go ahead, Derry.
Yeah, I think one of the things to add in that, and this is kind of ties back to leadership, is allowing the training part of this and the communication to say, we're going to do things, we're going to improve things, and it may seem like your job is being replaced, but we're not. We're actually trying to make your job easier and make you more efficient. So, your job shouldn't be pressing a button. Your job should be thinking, right? Let's replace your pressing the button job and allow you to think as a human and treat you appropriately so that you can do that. And one of the things that we've seen, what we strongly advocate for whenever we go into a customer, and they said, we want to implement a new system. I said, I will only do that if you associate training with the workers who are actually going to be affected by this, or else this is going to fail spectacularly.
Right, you'll have sabotage. And I think they became Dusty's best friend, but for a while there, they were good. Dusty.
It's a great point, because we had, and there was a lot of union labor too. So we had to do coordinated trainings. So there's a group in Gettysburg and a group in DC. It got to the point where if we trained Gettysburg 10 minutes before we trained DC, there was a problem. But we did many training facilitations. It was actually pretty fun, to take people that weren't used to something modern and getting them kind of liking it and have them be fussy up front. But we made a game out of it, so it was good.
Yeah, they became your best friends, but I know I was happy to be your flak jacket. I know you were getting some incoming was coming.
And
Go ahead, Brittany. Yes.
I was just going to say, and to add to that, I think the term there is, whether you're the contractor or you're the person doing the training, is perseverance,
Yeah.
right? Just don't stop. Whatever roadblock they may or may not, fundamentally throw in your way mentally, don't stop. Persevere.
Yes.
I didn't
you can take that hill.
I did have one other. James Brown was an internal stakeholder that knew the FCC really well, and we were tag team together as part of this initiative. So he gave me the inside agency side, and then I came from the outside, and we kind of tackled the whole thing together. So
Very well said. And I think that also is the model is, yes, if you're coming from the outside, make sure you're paired with someone who is deep on the inside. And I think that's a really powerful pair together. It also sets sort of the idea that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is make visible the things that are invisible in an organization. For example, Dusty, you made visible how they were doing a lot of time-consuming things with the legacy system, and it could be much better with a more modern SaaS product. But it doesn't mean you get rewarded when you make the invisible visible. And if anything, we have the phrase, don't shoot the messenger. Ivana, you've been dealing a lot with invisible issues that people don't respond well to when they are made visible. And so I'd be interested in your thoughts about what can we do to help make it easier for people to shine a light on things, whether it's misinformation or things that, things that the organization has been telling themselves that may not necessarily be true, or they may be holding back on because they're worried about what they're going to find if they look underneath that rock.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will definitely answer that question, but I do want to tack on two other points based on the previous conversation, which is that working with and delivering services to the American population, essentially, it's a two-way street, right? And I think we need to actually get better at how do we go from a national strategy, as Derry mentioned before, and cascade that down to state and local in a way that's not very condescending to them. Because that's how a lot of state and official feels. It's like, oh, the big brother is telling me I have to do X, and all my grant money to do this is tied to what they want, but a lot of times it's not localized. They don't really take into consideration the fact that one state might have more Native American population than another state, without another state might have more tech companies in it. And so it's really about how do we actually work with the state and local officials. But then secondly, with the two-way street is that the American we need to give the American population a safe space where they can essentially go to and talk about this is what we need, and at the same time can start testing out that user experience for that user interface that Brittany was mentioning before, so that it can actually work, right? So essentially we're kind of using them as beta testers. At the same time, they get a forum to kind of vent out their feelings in a productive way instead of just spewing out whatever they want.
I like that. And it gets to sort of, and then I'll go to the question that I also asked about in making the invisible visible. What both you shine the light on is that, like you said, sometimes federal government can be perceived as being condescending to state and local. And so maybe what we need to do is figure out a way to empower that. And it would be wonderful if there was a way to have sort of the enterprise agreements, not just for software and hardware that the federal government can buy, but maybe it's shared with the state government. So we only do it once as opposed to having to do one-offs. And then I love the idea of a Do you want to sign up for US government beta? Recognizing it may not be perfect, but it can be a chance to weigh in, to give us feedback, and that might be a wonderful way to chime things in, because you're right. If people are just spewing what doesn't work, then that vitriol, it makes you feel like you did something when really all you did was you just dumped on the existing system and we didn't help or make it better. So with that, I guess, translating it to other actions, are there other things that the federal government can do to either embrace those ideas of making things more visible, or other things the federal government could do to make visible what needs to be done to improve delivery of services?
I think within the U.S. government, there needs to be more education on what tech actually means, and a reset of expectations that something is not a tech innovation or adoption isn't going to happen in your typical 2 to 3 year cycle that people go on, right? A lot of times not going to happen for like 10 years. And in the meantime, you need, as Brittany said, like perseverance, grit, and all that stuff. But when you're also tying people's pay grade, where like their performance to a specific and unrealistic set of metrics, that doesn't really work. And on the sort of the flip side of that is the fact that the American population also needs to be aware of the fact that when you try out any tech app, like it's going to fail, right? A couple of times you're going to hit bugs. I think the first time that Insta went live, or the first year that Instagram went live, they were down like 30 to 40% of the time. And people are okay with it. And if you think about like whenever you go onto HubSpot or Salesforce, they have this little thing that's like, it's, we do maintenance every single week from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. on Sunday, right? But whenever the government puts that up, people get really, really grumpy about it.
Right. For some reason, we have to be up all the time.
And I don't know why that happens, but that's something that I think is, once again, the education aspect of it too.
Excellent. Really appreciate it. And those are really great insights. And yeah, I would love to figure out why is it that we hold, the very place that needs to make up for technical debt is being held to the standard of needing to be 99.99999%. So Byron, your thoughts about what we could do about adoption and innovation in terms of why does it matter? And in particular, maybe if we could also cross the threshold to how do you recommend the administration proceed to do this?
So a couple things on this one. And I actually want to poke on a few things that Derry and Ivana and honestly Brittany and Dusty have brought up too. Humanizing government services, that whole like bridge between federal and local of, what's the most terrifying words in government? Hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. Right. And it's a funny thing because that's a very common opinion that is from anything that's doing shared services to anything that's doing multi-level government stuff. But like, these are people, right? This is, at its core level, I'll take ICF for an example, right? ICF is most of their business is training and technical assistance for like health, human services, childhood education, right? These are people that live and die by that mission. Their job, is to, in a lot of cases, figure out how states, locals, municipalities, regions, irrespective of socioeconomic conditions, demographics, can do better taking care of the people that are most vulnerable in the population, right? That's a human element to a really core mission that honestly most of the citizens can get behind. Like that specific example use case that's repeated everywhere, from farm services to health and homeland security to defense to intelligence. I mean, these are people that are passionate about the mission because they not only does it pay their bills, but they believe in it and they're doing something good for the American people as a whole, right? Humanizing that to a level, and honestly, from an administration perspective of promoting and promulgating that idea of, this is a public service, this is a public good, this is people giving back to the citizenry for advancing the safety, security, and prosperity of the nation. I mean, that idea in and of itself to glom around is pretty powerful, right? Tech's an aspect of that lets them do their jobs significantly better and lets us as a people have better insight, visibility, and transparency into not only what we do but how it gets done, and really at its core why, right? So having this that's kind of elevates the conversation of, well, I don't like this, to, hey, can we do this better? Is this the right role of government? Is there policy that supports it? Are there programs that support it? Are we structuring ourselves to make things easy for that to happen, for those good actions to happen sort of across the government sector there. What was the other part of the question? I think I hit like two of the
no,
three.
you definitely hit it, and I really,
there.
I loved how you were talking about get back to the mission. I guess how else do you recommend that the administration should proceed, given that they probably are looking and they say they want to get a lot done in 100 days, but then there's also the next 3 years before we're talking about the next election or things like that. So how would you recommend the administration proceed?
This is where I think honestly, like that grand challenge idea of picking 2 or 3, ideas, picking 2 or 3 initiatives and really putting effort and dollars. And it doesn't have to be tech. It can be science. It can be research. It can be another
climate change.
Cancer moonshot, climate change.
Thank
Thank you. Yeah. Social justice.
And by the person in Florida, climate change. Yes.
How above sea level is your place? I shouldn't ask. Sorry.
13 feet. Thank you. 13 feet. Thank you.
All right.
So
you
you
got a
have
few
like,
decades.
Well, you get a few dozen years at that maybe. Yeah, I would be looking at that, because when I think of all the good that did, and I'll take early era Obama administration of what are those first like top 10 priorities, national strategy for trusted identities in cyberspace, the TIC initiative for network security, any of those kind of core like agency level or cross government level efforts to say, hey, we have these shared problems, how do we solve them? Putting OMB as in its great role of sort of that power to convene and coordinate and direct funds around through pass back or congressional language justification or anything like that. That's where you could really start seeing problem solving across different domains and different areas of government, not only at the federal level, but as Darius has mentioned a few times, is the state, local, and honestly down to localities as well, having that kind of those forums convened to identify challenges, problems, and opportunities for investment and innovation there. I mean, those are kind of, yeah, there's the structural thing about like changing the FAR and actually trying to figure out the next set of things that went wrong because we tried to follow a document that nobody read, and codifying that into policy. But yeah, I think putting energy around what are like a couple really big ideas in terms of healthcare delivery, what are a couple really big ideas in terms of climate change, what are a couple big ideas in overall health of cancer research is the one that sort of keeps hitting me. So like that's where I think it'd go.
Very well said, and I really like how you said, if we can find something that has us lift up from our own individual departments and agencies, and even our state versus federal versus local, that can unify the country on this is something big we're going to do, whether it's in health, climate change, addressing the need for everyone to have the ability to have internet connectivity. I think that is a really powerful way. So we're now at the lightning round, and so this is where we're going to go to each of you and ask for your 2 to 3 tweet length recommendations. You can go a little bit longer; they can be extended tweets, but 2 to 3 tweet length recommendations as to specific action steps that you have for the new administration. Dusty, as always, I know you always bring interesting and provocative ideas. What would be your recommendations for specific steps forward?
Well, I think one of your questions was about misinformation and things of that nature. And so I think micro content without the full citing of the full content should be punishable by the most extreme versions of the law. So I think that's devastated our society. I think it's really easy to share a clip, get caught on, but you never really understand what that is. So I think legislation really having consequences for anyone that passes micro content as truth should be a problem. I think the administration and society as a whole, this is probably not a favorable opinion here, but it seems like it's always slanted to one way. So I'm a nonpartisan human. I think everyone needs to recognize that misinformation happens on both sides of the fence, not one. And as soon as we can do that, then we can put policies and procedures in place of understanding that. But if we have a slant that it's only always coming from one way, it's a really dangerous aspect for society. But yeah, my number one thing would be make VNRs, video news release, require the media to disclose that they're using them. And number 2, micro content legislation to punish people without posting the full content. I think those are 2 things that could really change how our lives are today.
Can I ask a question on that one, actually?
Yeah, go ahead, Byron.
And honestly, I want to ask it of I think Ivana and Daria here. the bias and implicit, the implicit bias recognition of where information's coming from. I mean, that's sort of one of those things that we've seen over and over again in the last, call it, decade, really explode out. I mean, the guard against that tends to be improved critical thinking, which isn't a thing that we teach, right? It's something that you fall into pretty much. Either you've got a formal rhetoric class in university or college level, or you've just sort of get really tired of hey, this is something's wrong and I gotta go educate yourself there. But like is that something that, education wise, policy wise, early, in the early mid childhood, is that should we re-look at how our citizenry gets educated about how to recognize security for one thing, but also just where their information is coming from.
All right, Ivana, and then Derry, unfortunately tweet links, but you can give multiple tweets on it. Ivana, what are your thoughts about how we can encourage more critical thinking capabilities?
So I do think critical thinking is an aspect of it, and that, as you said, is typically taught at a university level. It's not even taught, right? Like, there's a reason why liberal arts schools exist. It's not because being a history major will get you the best job ever or the best paying job ever, but it's because it teaches you critical thinking. But I mean, if you look at just the people who participated in the storming of the Capitol, like, you can call them terrorists, you can call them insurrectionists, like whatever you want to call them. A lot of them are not your like lowly educated folks. Like, they're CEOs of companies, they're highly educated people, but there's that cognitive dissonance, and that they've like wrapped themselves in such an echo chamber that for them, that was the logical thing to do, because they genuinely believe that our country has fallen like that, like it is their duty, right? Their categorical imperative to go and do this thing. And so it's really about how do we actually break down that echo chamber so that they are exposed to new ideas. And I think that is something that, unfortunately, COVID has prevented ways of doing that right now. But so we need to be a lot more creative, and that's where, big tech algorithms kind of come in and say, like, is there any way they can, for example, I don't know, instead of doing a personalized news feed, that they start to allow more of the mainstream media to kind of get into that news feed based on the topics that they're interested in.
But isn't mainstream controlled by 6 major corporations? And then
that's the other. I mean, American democracy essentially died when local news became victims to big tech.
For profit, and it's biased in one way. So if you have one group of humans destroying businesses and lighting them on fire, and it's okay because it's in the name of one thing, and I'm not excusing any party, by the way, but it's an example. That was good job. This other thing, really bad thing. So unless we view destruction as destruction, we can't come to change.
Yeah.
So
I think that there's that.
The destruction on one side's cool, on the other side it's bad. You can't. Destruction's bad in general.
Yeah, I mean, what you're hitting on is this like dehumanization effect, right? Like, we're demonizing the other side to the point that we don't see them as humans, and that is basically, if you look at the Rwandan genocide and things like that, it all started with name calling the other side as cockroaches or anything that's not human. And we're going down that same path, and it's like, how do we actually start to humanize each other? And that's like a very wishy-washy thing to say, but yeah.
But it's important, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm smiling because I have been trying to advocate building bridges for a while. I guess it's actually been the last decade, and I think what we've sort of been the undercurrent of what we've been talking about is it's getting harder and harder to do things to improve delivery of public services without get caught in the political crossfire. And I really appreciate Dusty being brave enough, and then Byron to ask the question and Ivana to chime in. If we don't solve how to make the political crossfire less hazardous to the experience of those who are trying to improve delivery of public services, we won't see the right people signing up for it. And maybe, Derry, I know Byron also asked for your thoughts. Maybe if I can go to you and then to Brittany for closing tweet link thoughts. I think maybe we've hit the nail on the head for the new administration. At the end of the day, if they don't figure out a way to make it so that people want to improve the delivery of public services and all people, it's going to be really hard to do it. But Derry, your thoughts, and then maybe Brittany.
Yep. So I think that last statement you just made was one of the points we definitely have to make happen, right? It is improvements to all. Government stepping in and just making a blanket statement that this is the correct information is once again an institution. How do you build that trust, right? I don't think the government necessarily will be the arbiters of that. But the government did really great things in the in the early days of the internet, which is fund it, right? And the funding that went into that, the funding for a lot of the tech that we have as the basis of what we have came from funding. And I think, Brittany, you mentioned this earlier, which is funding. How we're falling behind and not just Brittany, but Ivana did this as well, which is we're falling behind other nations. So how do we fund these technologies that we would like to do in the innovation side? How do we fund the ways, and not just technologies, but social programs, so that we can help with that increased citizen engagement, right? So that you can increase that trust in the paths that we have. Solving the challenges that we're talking about in terms of the misinformation and disinformation, you put it back into another company, and once again, you fall prey to the same challenge that you were trying to solve. You create the problem you were solving in the first place. And I was having a conversation with my wife and my daughter the other day. What if those superheroes didn't do all the crazy things they did and destroyed an entire nation? Would they have created any more enemies? Probably not. So, are we making a bigger problem than we actually are trying to solve? So we have to figure out that balance, and that is the challenge. It's not easy, right? So how do we fund the citizen engagement and the training at the local level? Because if we only do that national strategy, it won't work. What works for somebody in Tennessee won't work for someone in downtown DC, right? So we have to figure that out, and that's the part of that funding of the technology that's needed to make to solve what Byron was suggesting here.
Excellent. And I'll then go to Brittany, Ivana for tweet link recommendations, and then Byron. But go ahead, Desi. You have a quick rejoinder before we go to Brittany? Yes.
I was going to say, I was talking earlier, there's no incentivization for saving an agency money. But if all the savings, we gave the savings to the local level, and so you get the same budget every year, but every agency that saves, it gets filtered down to the state and local, that might be an interesting thing to do. So then you're not punished for doing good at the federal.
I like that a lot. Save systems, save money, get the ability to actually bring that back to the local level. So Brittany, your chance for tweet link recommendations, and Ivana, and then Byron will bring it home for us.
Great. I think we all kind of said it over the course of this conversation, but it's, when I boil it down in my world, I think it's going back to 2021, and this administration should be charged with getting rid of technical debt and changing the perception of the federal agencies to make it more, instead of a livelihood experience, more of a thrivelihood experience. It really should be, how do we take the next step level, not to just survive as a federal agencies and a federal government in competition, because to Darius' point, we're falling behind, and we're falling behind really fast, right? So it really is, I think, changing perception and then getting rid of the technical debt.
Well said. Thank you, Brittany. Ivana, your thoughts?
I would say work with state and local officials to have some type of safe environment, so that national, local, and state officials can actually have genuine conversations with the American population in a constructive manner, so that we can better understand their needs, and also to get their user experience.
There's a lot powerfully said in that it is about having the conversation so we can understand their experiences. I appreciate that, Ivana.
And gain their trust.
Gain their trust, which at the end of the day, it is about making sure benevolence, competence, and integrity. Exactly, having trust. So,
yeah.
So Byron, your closing thoughts as to what we can do tactically in terms of action steps with the new administration.
Jesus, you made it, you gave me the hard one of like, okay, let me give me my 10-point plan.
Yeah,
all right.
Exactly. Well, assume OMB approaches you and says. Yeah.
Not again. Okay. A few things, right? I love some of the ideas put out here. The thrust of the first couple chunks of it ought to be, humanization of federal services, I think, right? That's here are missions that are core and we care about, and that really contribute to the general health and well-being of the nation. Looking at how those get done, I love the idea of the innovation funding sort of mechanisms for saving dollars, given if you actually modernize and can reclaim some of that cost, being able to use it for other work, be it public-private partnerships, be it for state and local engagement, be it for further modernization. That's fantastic. Love to see more of that more often at a cross-federal level that also integrates, with the state, local municipalities, tribes and territories, like go on and there on and so forth. And then, honestly, like I said it a couple times, but pick those 2 or 3 big national problems that you can unify at, right? That can demonstrate all of the areas that have been talked about by the panel for it, because those in and of themselves demonstrate humanization. They demonstrate something of the best of us as a people that we all strive for, public health, public well-being, and really then we can be creative on how to solve problems within the challenges themselves, to see if they work. And honestly, this is one of those, government shouldn't be a hidebound structure. It should be something that is emergent and serves the needs of citizens. And if those needs are better ways of doing things, we should be able to test them out. We should be able to experiment. We should be able to see how we can, as a group of technologists, advisors, policy officials, accountants, budget folks, all together can work and really get potential ways of doing business better together.
Well said, and I really appreciate it, Byron. I'm going to actually channel my inner Dusty and can take what you said in terms of humanize public service, understand where people are coming from across the nation, and then grow and learn together, or as Dusty would say, give the nation a hug. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us. You are truly positive change agents. We could easily have another conversation. In fact, I hope you will come back to the GeoTech Hour on what we can do increasingly about the other challenges of dealing with the challenges of media, misinformation, the money associated with it, with bots. Easily another conversation for another GeoTech Hour. But meanwhile, I want to thank each of you for all that you do as positive change agents. To everyone else out there in our audience that are positive change agents too, please keep on persisting positively, and please be bold, please be brave, and please be benevolent for the future ahead. Till next time.